There's a lot of people that feel the shaking. There's a lot of people that recognize things aren't going to be able to continue to go as they have, and that changes are coming. And their response to that a lot of times is fear, or you might hear the term prepper. And a lot of times that is stockpiling lots of things, stockpiling food or stockpiling ammo. That's not really our approach. The idea of stockpiling and the nature of it is not sustainable. That's what the stockpile is that it's going to have an end. And we're trying to think about it from an approach that how could we recognize that there are changes coming, things are failing, things are not going to always go as they have, and can we be doing something to prepare for that that has a look ahead in a positive way, that maybe can teach people how to sustain themselves or bring people together in a way that's not antagonistic but is cooperative. Get sort of the same shaking. We're not in disagreement that things aren't failing. We want to respond to it in a way that brings hope and brings cooperation. This land is community owned. It's about 500 acres. There's 1,200 of us here, maybe 350 families.
Hey Lee, let's keep an eye on Shannon if we can. We're gonna need to get Buffy and Skeeter harnessed right away.
Might describe ourselves as a community of agriculturally based, intentional community that's focused on agriculture, farming, sustainability. It's not really a new idea, it's sort of a revival of an old idea. Recognizing that if we don't do it intentionally, we're going to go in a direction of high-tech, modernity.
Good girl, good girl. Get up.
Doing less and less for ourselves, which is supposed to be better, that's supposed to be progress. But we feel like we're losing the sense of our lives in all of the technology and all the fast moving and doing less and less with our hands. We're moving so fast now. Sometimes we don't know the direction we're going. You know, I read a quote yesterday that said, "We all want progress, but sometimes recognizing that you're on the wrong road and getting off and going to the other road is the right thing." And in that case, the first person to jump off and turn around is the most progressive. That was C.S. Lewis. This is our grist mill, and so you'll see the wheel is on. We've revived a 18th century water wheel, and we don't have a natural occurring spring, so we are using a modern pump to pump the water up, but then it's gravity feeding the sluice box, and it's turning an overshot wheel. The overshot wheel, of the three kinds of water wheels, it's the most powerful because you're getting the most gravity fall, where the water's pouring on top of the wheel and causing it to turn in what you might say is forward. So down on the bottom land, we're growing the wheat, and we're bringing up here, and we're grinding it to our flour here. I think it might be the last working grist mill in Texas. You might have a grist mill that was turned by some horses, like our sorghum mill over here. That red pole there is a horse-drawn sorghum mill. And it's like two spools, and the sorghum is a cane. And we grow sorghum down on the bottom land, and we can get sorghum pecan ice cream at the cafe. It's a sweetener of the South that was really locally available before the sugar trade. What you would do is you take the canes, they kind of look like corn stalks really, and you push the canes between those two wheels, and it was really a press, and it squeezed the juice out of the canes into a little box, and we take it down to a cookhouse where you cook it down so it doesn't ferment, and then you can store it as a syrup. It's a little bit like molasses. And so every town would have a sorghum press that was horse-drawn or a grist mill or a combination. And folks would come around with their wheat that they grew for their farm, and they would convene together and kind of wait in line for their turn to put their wheat through the mill to grind their grain for flour. So we revived this barn, and we're still using it as a grist mill, as well as where you can come and have some tea.
This building was assembled as a mill around, I think, 1760. So this is a pretty standard Dutch-style, German-style barn. So this is operated entirely by the water wheel outside. There's a shaft that's coming into the basement. But what transfers the power here to the upstairs are these two belts. So you've got this belt here operating this horizontal shaft. You can take a look at this gear. See the teeth on that gear made out of wood. So if you broke an iron tooth gear way back when, the blacksmith is going to be expensive. So they made the teeth out of wood, much like this one here. Try to be as self-sufficient as possible. So what's interesting is that ball bearings and bushings have not yet been invented, but that vertical shaft is running, as you can see, straight and true. And what they have found is this makes an excellent bearing. You can recognize what that is, right?
It's that corn?
That's a corn cob. You can actually see the bottom of them. We estimate some of those cobs are over 100 years old, and they work great. That's the hard red wheat berries that comes down into this tray, and when the top of the tray fills to the bottom of the elbow, the flow stops. So this is self-feeding, self-regulating. See how it's rocking back and forth. That's why it's called the cradle. Well, the cradle's being rocked by this stick, which is called the damsel. So the damsel rocks the cradle, and it's right here where the grain falls into the center of the eye of the stone. Of course, over time, a wooden damsel will be rounded out to a wooden dowel, in which case we have a damsel in distress. But she's doing a fine job. So the grain's folding down, and it's hitting the bedstone, so it's filling up the grooves around the eye of the stone. So through that dynamic, wheat becomes the fine flour that comes out between the two stones, and it comes over here to the chute, and from the chute it goes down into the bucket. This millstone's spinning at 23 RPM. But back in the day, it was probably spinning about 100 RPM. It would kick up a lot of flour dust. So there's going to be a problem if we know these stones are not to touch, but they're very, very close. We know how close they must be. If we have a flour, that's fine. But if I lost my grain, I might lose that tolerance, and I could have a stone striking a stone at high RPM. That could result in a spark. Well, flour dust will explode. It's a hydrocarbon, and the flour will burn. So the miller would be using the sense of smell. That's where you heard the phrase, keep your nose to the grindstones. The mill was the epicenter of social and economic activity. People would come to the mill and would bring a grist of grain, a measure of grain, or something else to process. We would tap into the power that the water wheel is supplying for the community. That's why we have the long belt up here, and it's operating this line shaft with all of these different wheels and things. Because as the community grew and had different needs, they would put a belt on a wheel, and you could operate fibercraft, pottery, wood lathe. So there's a lot going on at the mill. You've heard this phrase, and this is where it comes from. If I ask you, well, what are you doing today? And you said, nothing, I'm just milling around. But back then it meant I'm off the homestead, I'll be at the mill.
So we've sort of separated kind of the public side of the land from the private side so that people can have their private homesteads and all of that. Yeah, it's nice. Here on the land, we can get to everywhere by foot. So we're right in the heart of, they call it the heart of Texas, the hot heart of Texas. What's really known about this area is the pecans. A lot of the pecans around the world are grown right in what they call the Brazos Valley. So this is a pecan tree here. There's some pecans, there's some plums, there's some peaches. We're always trying to improve the orchards. You want to think about where can there be another garden? Where can there be a greenhouse? What can we do with animals? How can we graze that one year and do something different? You see over here in the corner, we've got some bees. So the bees are pollinating the garden. We've got a beekeeper that spreads those hives around and mines them. It's always in flux. Here lately, we've been working on a hydrology study to dam up some of the gullies and some of the creeks that kind of run through this land and slow down the water to try to recharge the water table. Because if you let that water just run straight through, it will go right to the river and you start to lose your water table. But if we can slow it down and dissipate it and retain it, we can start to recharge some of our shallow wells that are down on the bottomland that are feeding the farm. We were very fortunate just a few years ago to be able to drill our own well down to the Second Trinity, which is a very deep aquifer below us, about 2,000 feet, and get our own municipal water supply license so that the land is now supplied by its own water system. We're not relying on another municipal system. And if we were to keep moving down that path, think about power. And here in the last 2 years, we've been installing a massive solar field, with a massive inverter system and collector system so that we can run the whole community land off grid. So this is another side of the craft village where we could do classes, we can do seminars in this gray barn, where we could do canning classes and bee classes, all sorts of food preservation classes. We have a commercial kitchen back here. And then this cabin, this is a 1750s cabin. This is one of the oldest buildings on the land, and it's our basket shop.
And what was it? Was it moved here?
Yeah, it was moved here. All the structures here we've taken from other places, mainly upstate New York, some in Canada, and we've relocated them and set them back up here. This a family lived in. It was a homestead cabin. Hello. Do you know the story on this cabin? A family of 10, right? Lived in this as a one-room cabin, right? And there wasn't a hole in the floor.
Right, there was no stairway.
Right? They would enter upstairs from the window, right? So that was the little hatch. The family would go in through the little ladder, go into the hatch every night and pull up the ladder.
So it's tiny. I mean, that's
Yeah.
like a...
It was real security. I mean, you were pioneers. This is your cabin. You'd have the ground floor for eating and cooking, and then you'd sleep up above. And so you'd pull on the ladder and close the hatch, and you'd have a certain level of safety for the night.
How did you learn to weave? Actually, Martha, who lived just a couple doors down from us, who used to run the basket shop.
And you make things out of leather?
Exactly. So these are kind of your men's toiletry bag, we call them a dock kit. There we've got wallets, we've got pad folios. Our number one seller is these fly swatters.
Did you grow up here?
I did not.
So how'd you hear about it?
So we're from Arkansas. A friend of mine found out about the place when he was in Texas, and he told me about it. And some of our friends who started this shop in 2015, we became good friends with them and started helping them around here, and eventually we took things over for them.
Yeah.
So.
Are you guys finding the problem of using chemicals for tanning?
We're actually working on doing some of it ourselves.
Without chemicals, it's a challenge, right?
It is. If we did it, we would start with just like an oak bark tanning and try to avoid the heavy chemicals and do like a natural vegetable tan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
There's always people coming from other places. They come with an idea or a vision or a hope, or they realize there's another piece that we're not doing. Sometimes people rekindle a dream maybe they had a long time ago.
For me, it was just to work from home and to be with my family and kids. So to be able to do leatherworking and we do some woodworking, it's pretty special to involve your family with this.
Do you live here?
I do. I live just right around the corner here.
And you can live and work and just stay, and
Absolutely.
so it's a real community.
Yes,
right?
ma'am, it is.
Yeah.
We celebrated 50 years this year, yeah. So this will all be revamped to really get it more like a park. And then we're also in the middle of another project where we're adding a leather shop and a stained glass shop. So there's a few folks here that are third generation people, where their parents were some of the original folks that started the community. Howdy.
Hello.
You're proving that the cobbler's kids will have shoes. As
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
woodworker is fixing the door. So this is Mark, he runs the wood shop. Can we go in?
Yeah, that's good.
My parents joined the community here when I was 9.
Okay.
So,
you were exposed to craft at a young age. And you still live here?
yes,
Yeah.
I live on the farm here. So it's about a 5-minute bicycle ride to work every morning. I've been working here in the shop for 28 years, building lots of custom furniture, classes. The Windsor chair
You
here.
made this chair? Mm-hmm. Oh, it looks antique. Wow.
We usually do an antiquing on it. So for this one, we start with a log and we split the wood out with a sledgehammer, wedges, split it down into little spindles. So one of these little sticks will become one of these sticks for the back here.
Okay.
And these pieces here are steamed. So we take it from a log that's wet, steam these pieces to bend them, and then make the whole chair. So we start Monday with a log and paint the chair Saturday. These are made out of hickory, and I'm making a chair. It's a custom order, and we've been bending these legs. We heat it up and steam it and bend it in a mold. So I'm doing 6 chairs. So we have several parts here, so each pair will be 1 chair worth. This right here is going to be the frame for a door that we're making. This will be a door jamb, and then the door is over here. We were just gluing that here just a little bit ago. So you can see the grain pattern on here, these little spots, little wiggly spots in here. That's the quarter sawn white oak. This is a box. It's made out of sycamore. On the end here, the grain lines run straight up and down. The tree rings run straight up and down. If they were running slightly at an angle, all this beautiful pattern will disappear. It'll just be a white wood. You won't see the pattern at all. We sharpen all of our own tools, chisels and saws and planes. There's a little mallet. I made this mallet 28 years ago. So it's pounded a lot of chisels. There's a lady that comes in about every year and a half and she wants to buy it. After you put yourself into it though, yeah, I can't sell it. It's served me too well to get rid of it at this point. I just love this board and the planing. It makes little curls. Just smell that one.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing?
What is that?
Sassafras. So they used to take the roots of this sassafras tree and boil them to make root beer. So you kind of can smell the root beer smell in it. It's amazing how stout it is, but just feel how slick this is. That's the wood just off the plane. There's not been any sanding on it. And so what we're trying to do is teach somebody the skill of using the hand plane, the chisels and things, because you really can speed it up considerably over using a machine, unless you're trying to do 100 chests of drawers all the same. If you're doing one, these hand methods work very well. It's very, very efficient. So
Sometimes when everything is so machine cut, it's going
Yes.
to lose
yes,
something like
no, it does. And a lot of times I notice if I go to IKEA or something and you look at a piece of furniture, they make all the sizes modular so that you can make it easily by machine.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily translate into something that's pleasing that pulls you into the piece. Whereas if you do it by hand and you know the design principles, you can make something. It may take a few moments longer, but it's going to be a piece that lasts for 200 years, and people are going to enjoy it with that sense of fulfillment for that whole time. And when you have someone as a craftsman that puts themselves in a piece of furniture and somebody comes and feels it, you can feel, if somebody puts your heart and soul into a piece, you can feel it. This is how we do all of our dovetails, and I'm just going to do 2 lines here. That shows me how deep to saw. Okay.
I'm noticing that there's no measuring tape here.
No measuring tape. So I'm going to cut some angles on here. These angles I'm going to cut by eye. So I've just cut down to this depth line here.
So how is it that you can do it without a measuring tape?
Just practice. I think I've done about 14,000 dovetails. So the dovetail joint is really designed for drawers, and it lasts when you put it together. I could easily take this corner and I could nail it together and put a drawer together, poke 2 nails in there. The wood shrinks and swells when the humidity changes, and when the humidity changes and it swells, those nails are going to get loose and work their way out over time. But if I do a dovetail and the humidity changes, it shrinks or swells, both boards shrink and swell at the same rate, and so nothing gets loose. It'll just be there for 300-400 years, no problem. This takes a few minutes, 3 minutes or something, but to have a joint then that lasts for a couple hundred years is just amazing. So I'm just tracing these angles here.
This joint is made just one board for the other. And that's something that's really changed how we think now. We think about one size fits all or one size fits most or mass production. When you're thinking about a craft, that mentality isn't really present. You're really thinking about how one piece fits to the next, and you're creating a piece that's unique to itself.
when I do this one here, this is going to make a sound, and I listen for the sound. So I'm really training all 5 senses. But I'm going to saw across here. It's going to make a sound. It goes. When I get right close to the end, the sound changes. It goes. And I'm listening for that pitch change so I don't cut too far. Can you hear it change? Isn't that amazing?
Is it talking to you?
It is. It is. Then I know exactly when to stop. I'm listening to each little stroke. If you put too much pressure or not enough pressure, and also the safety aspect of this, we've discovered with a handsaw, if you slip, you're going to stop before you saw all the way through your finger. Yeah. With a table saw, it happens too fast. And so there really is a safety margin. With the hand tool methods, I can teach a child without too much risk. So now we just tap this right in here. One little dovetail. And then we'll take the plane and just smooth it just a bit. You build a relationship with your tools, and I can tell that somebody else has used my plane because it's not working like it would have if I had left it. When I was about 15, I knew I wanted to be a woodworker. And I don't really look at it as work so much. I thoroughly enjoy it. There we go.
So you actually develop a relationship with your tools too, and with
yes.
the type of wood,
Yes.
with the conditions, with
Yes,
the
sir.
with sounds.
With the sounds, yes. And the smells too. I mean, you can smell this one. This is pine. This is a completely different smell. It doesn't smell anything like this one. These here are mesquite. We're going to drill holes in the top of it and for candles. Part of what I enjoy is trying to take a piece of wood that somebody else will walk in and say, oh, this is an ugly piece of wood with a knot. When I look at this piece of wood, I see something more than just a knot. I see this could be a box, and you could have the knot right in the middle of the box. Would be nice. If it was offset, it would be out of balance. And so to me, I see things in the wood that a lot of people don't see. And I really enjoy somebody bringing a picture in of something that they want and then being able to work with them, design something. And so when we get this done, I'm going to have a piece of myself invested in it. The drawers have the dovetails, the hand-cut dovetails, just like we did. And we use a solid wood bottom, so it's a whole half-inch thick. It's not the little thin plywood things that a lot of the box stores have. So the drawers will go in here. So it's all pretty much custom designed just for her space. But I really enjoy interacting with people like that. You invest yourself in so many pieces, and so there's a piece of you all over the place. I really like that feeling. So.
Fiber crafts and textiles is pretty much dead in America. It's all been farmed out and all mechanized. We do a lot of weaving, a lot of spinning. These looms are from all over the place. If you go all the way back to the story of Gandhi, who was a major nonviolent revolution for India, really broke India free from colonization from Britain. He did it first by what he says, decolonizing his own clothes. Because he was an educated Indian in Britain, and if you see the photos of Gandhi before he started his revolution, you would think he looked like an English gentleman. And he said, I'm going to decolonize my people, and I'm going to start with my clothes. And so he started wearing traditional Indian garb, and he would always carry a small hand spinning loom where he would turn this little crank, and it would turn a gear that would spin, and he was always spinning his own thread because he wanted to stop all dependence on Britain. There's kind of your 3 basic needs for life: food, clothing, and shelter. And textiles has been so farmed out and is such a commodity, we actually forget about textiles. And part of the journey back to sustainability is going to include textiles too, and being able to make our own clothes, make our own garments, and deal with fabrics. This is a Swedish draw loom. This is my favorite loom here. because this is an early, arguably the first computer. And so you draw out in kind of a pixelated form the graphic that you want to make. And by pulling these little wooden dowels, you change what part of the reed is up and down as you shoot the shuttle, and then it will begin to produce the graphic depending on what row you're on. How this loom works, it's on a series of 5 where you do 4 up and 1 down. And so when you're playing with these dowels, you're changing which side the 4 up is on and which side the 1 down is on, and that will change essentially the pixel, if the pixel is white or if it's the color. And so you can see even in these white pixels, there's one little thread of green. And so this 4 up and 1 down on a series of 5, and then playing with these dowels to change at which area the 4 up is and the 1 is down, you can make the graphics. And so the weavers can literally draw out a graphic on a piece of graph paper, and then they can follow it through and work the dowels and make the graphic. That's binary computer stuff. This developed into a punch card system, which is what you have here. The next layer of that would be where you could, rather than doing it by hand, by pulling the dowels, you could do it by program. And so you would set these pins to the program, it'll roll this little scroll through and do the same thing with these little keys. This is a punch card. Oh, and now look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 2 bytes.
Yeah.
So the series of 8, which every computer is based on, 768, 1024, what's a megabyte? 1024. That's all divisions of 8, because 1 bit, 8 bits is 1 byte, 16 bits is 2 bytes, right? 4 bits is a nibble. Engineers have a sense of humor, right? This all goes back to all computers system are based on an 8-bit system. You remember the old original 8-bit Nintendo had 256 colors?
Yes.
Why? Because 1 pixel could contain 1 bit, and the number of permutations and combinations of 1s and 0s in an 8-digit cycle is 256. So you had 256 colors for 1 pixel. That's an 8-bit system. So what do we have here? We have a 2-bit system. So this is I think a 13th century loom. So we can take some things that we're doing in very, very high tech now back to some very early beginnings.
This was actually made here?
Yeah, so we had a class of young boys that wanted to make their own coat. And so they spun their own fabric, they wove their own fabric, and then they sewed their own coat. And that was a 2nd year floor loom class. They started in the spring, and by fall they had their coat for the winter. And so that would be a senior project that some young men or some young ladies might do, where we're really trying to rediscover what it is to really provide for ourselves. And we feel a lot of meaning in that, because we could go down to a store and go buy a coat that was made very quickly and probably very cost effectively, probably in an underdeveloped country, probably by a child, and probably not for a fair wage. We feel like we can actually do something about that right here. We can start reclaiming a connection with the land and our food. We can start reclaiming meaning in our own hand skills, making our own clothes, and in relationships. This is a little village here where people can come and stay. So the name of that business is Cargo Home, the shipping container stuff. So Cargo Home is started by some folks in the community. That's sort of a test village, kind of that tiny home village. And we've got a couple of experiments there. So this is sort of a good look at a street, 5-acre lots. This is a house here that my friend built. Geography is really important to do a lot of farming kind of things together. But we also try to group together so that my neighbor on one side is the CPA for our business. We share land together. One property away is another community member, and we can share milk chores, or we can share animals and trade pastures. Different people find their way in different places. You know, some people, farming is full-time and a real passion, and other people, they're just gardening. Or some people are really into having a couple of animals, and other people aren't really having animals, but they're really into doing field crops. And so everybody kind of finds their way of like, what steps for me and my family am I needing to make ground? And everybody kind of finds their way. So this is a great place that we built a couple years ago. Rita! My friend Caleb, he did gardening right up front in the front yard rather than doing lawning. You know, lawning was an English invention by the king or the queen. lawning, the big English garden and mowing, and it was lawning. But rather than a big front lawn, how about a garden? And so there's some zucchinis and squash. There's some sunflowers there. There's some peppers in there, eggplant back there. There's some melons going on. I think this is the pumpkin here. And I think I saw, yeah, here's a pumpkin. Here's a green one. And so you rotate in, what are we doing? Is it a cover crop? And you want to do that because different plants will be feeding the soil and other plants will be sucking nutrients out of the soil. Marigolds are a great way to finish the edge of a bed because marigolds are natural bug deterrents. Bugs hate them. But now we're not just watering and cutting grass, we're tending the garden right in the front yard.
This seems so idyllic, but I'm guessing there's a lot of work behind this that you don't see.
Yeah. A lot of people move here or they come from other places, they come from other backgrounds. And when you're making a big shift, it really does come at a cost. You have to decide, is what I'm going for worth what I'm going to set aside here? For me, I lived in Austin for years and I worked as a builder for a commercial construction company. And I really loved my job and I loved what I was doing. And yet my wife and I felt like we needed to get out of the suburbs and we needed to reconnect with the land. And we knew about this community and we wanted to make ground coming this way. It was going to take a major shift. You know, I was going to have to quit a job that I loved and do something in the meantime. I took a metal panel job and I was selling metal panel instead of running a construction company, and that was quite a transition. And I remember one particular morning trying to pull a goat out from under a fence, and I was dressed to go meet clients, but I go out and my goat is escaping out from underneath the fence again. So I go grab her and I pull her back in the fence and I try to patch it up. Now I'm all dirty, I gotta go back inside. I thought, boy, this is gonna be a lot harder. It was a lot easier for me in Austin. And so standing there, you really weigh like, what am I doing? But I felt like this was going to be worth it. And so we stayed at it. And it wasn't long before an opportunity opened to start working with the barns. And it wasn't long after that before even somebody in the community said, why don't you finish your architecture license? So we have what I'd call a fair trade farm in Ecuador. That was started by a member here. So come on in.
Take time to find all these relationships.
This has been a long time. This has unfolded over 50 years. And so every so often someone will come along with an idea and it fits. So we'll go in here to the coffee roaster. So this has been Nykirk.
Nice to meet you. So you started the farm.
We started the farm before we came here. We came to the community, we were living in Houston and I was a business executive. I was never home. I never took vacation. I was constantly working. And this was a way that I could sell my business there and then stay here. My wife and I get up, we come work together. This is a beautiful thing.
So we can go look at the coffee shop.
We talked to Greg and decided he would have the coffee barista side on that side, the coffee shop, and we would do the roasting for them.
Starting to rain, oh boy. So one of our businesses is an architecture shop. It's where we do these timber frame barns. And most of our projects are centered on a timber frame. It's kind of how the business started, is that we were going to upstate New York and Ontario, Canada, and tearing down timber frames that were no longer being used. They were old agricultural buildings. The kind of the sweet spot for the time period on the American timber frames was about 1750s to about 1860s. It's where you had a lot of hand-hewn material. There were very few sawmills and still a lot of old growth material.
So what we're seeing here looks like it was...
Yeah, this is sort of an amalgamation of timber. The barn that it came out of wasn't in good enough condition to be a whole barn. And so our focus on the business is full barns, full buildings that only need some restoration and they can be restored back to their mainly original condition. But in the process of that, you get a lot of timber from a lot of barns that are not quite to the capacity to be restored as a full barn. And so we can do stuff with that timber too. And so everything in here, even though we're in a building that is modern construction, we're able to incorporate a lot of timber to give that same barn feel. So this was the first barn we ever put up. This frame uses these big connecting ties up here. Those are really distinguishably Dutch. This would be your connecting tie here. And so the connecting tie would go to the arcade post, and this would have been called the purlin plate, and the rafters would have come down this way, and they would have landed low here, and that would have been a quintessential Dutch frame. But what makes this barn unique is that on top of these purlin plates, they put a queen post. And on top of the queen post, they put another purlin plate running this way. And that top is very, very English. And so what we really have is a Dutch bottom with an English top that only happened in America. Because this style of building is as old as the 11th century. It's called the cathedral style of building. It was invented before the invention of the ridge beam. And so what's happening without the ridge beam is that the two rafters are coming in together and they're touching and they're pushing outward with thrust. And you'll see in old cathedrals in Europe that how they would brace that would be stone buttresses on the outside. Well, in timber framing, instead of a stone buttress, you'd have a collar tie, and the collar tie was under tension. And that mortise with those trunnels were holding the arcades in, keeping them from bowing out. So you get a really high plate. This would have been a hay storage barn, so they can store a lot of hay in it. And we would call it a quintessential American barn, because it only happened in America where the Dutch and the English were trading ideas and really developing a new architecture. This is a threshing barn. As a threshing barn, what would have happened is they would open the barn doors and they'd roll in the wagon and they would unload all the thresh from the grain. And they'd begin to thresh it. And they'd thresh it with a flail. And this is the original flail that came with this barn. And so they would beat the thresh. And so you drop that on the floor and you're beating the wheat out of the chaff. And there was a technique known, it's called flail away. You've probably heard that before. And so they would flail away and they would beat the grain out of the chaff, and then they would come in with a big winnowing fork. And the winnowing fork was like a large wooden pitchfork, and you'd throw the grain in the air. You had the barn doors open, and the prevailing breeze would blow the chaff out one side, and the grain would be left on the floor. The problem is that the grain would be so thick in here, it could be several inches thick, and it'd begin to spill out of the doorways. And so they had this board here. This is the original board here. And so they would put this board in place right here, and it would keep the thresh from spilling out of the doorways. And so it was called a threshold.
Oh my gosh.
I really love this community idea. It's what so many people want to do, but it's so hard.
It's very hard. It really comes at a cost. I mean, the American ideal, and we're very, very thankful for America. We have nothing negative to say. We love the fact that we can live free and we can be free and we can associate with people we want. That's very valuable to us. But the American ideal is very individualistic. And there's a real difficulty if you want to do community. You can't define yourself in yourself. You have to be defined by a larger group. And that's a cost to any person because they want to define themselves in an American ideal as an individual. And coming together as a community and sewing yourself into a different identity, that comes at a cost. So last year, our cafe burned down. And so we rebuilt it. That was the vestige of what was left of the building, that one burned wall. And we built it sort of log cabin style in the middle. But again, we did this all community. We did the stained glass. We built the tables. We built all the chairs. We wove the backs for those seats, for the benches. Everything in here, really. You can tell there's a few things that we had to buy, like track lights, ceiling tiles. But for the most part, this is a handcrafted building, really by our people. There's some expediting right there. You can just. And most of the food here is being grown in a greenhouse that's on the land. We're grinding our own wheat and baking our own bread from the wheat that we ground into our own flour. You'll see one thing that they're doing here is they're shucking their own potatoes for fries. No. So we've got our own potatoes and they're shucking them right now for French fries. This is an aquaponics greenhouse. A lot of the food that we're growing here we're using at the cafe. And this little box here, this is a solar water heater where you have a system of pipe that's set out in a spiral behind glass that's catching the south sun and heating up, and that heats the water that we'll use for the fish. It's kind of neat. We have tilapia in there, and the tilapia are fertilizing the water. You can eat tilapia. Tilapia are good fish to eat, And they're good filter fish. The problem with tilapia is that they're a little bit susceptible to cold temperatures, which is why we have these different heat systems. We've got the wood heat, we've got the solar heat, because if the water gets below about 50 degrees, the tilapia are going to float. So we got to keep the water nice and warm for them. They're a warm water fish. These fish will be feeding the garden. The garden will be filtering the water, and then we'll be able to pull the fish out and farm them too. So it's a whole miniature ecosystem. And it stays nice in here. So we're growing banana trees, I think a papaya back here, things that you can't normally grow in Texas because we're able to recreate a climate that allows for it. The water that is being cycling through the fish here, it's going underneath all of these beds. It's going underneath these beds, and it's going deep onto a tarp so we don't lose the water because we don't want it going down in the soil, but it's below all the soil that these plants are in. And so it causes these plants to dig deep for their water and then pull up those nutrients. These pipes here give us a look at what's going on with the wicking bed so we can see how much water is down there and how moist it is, because this goes all the way to the tarp that has the wicking bed in it. So that water is flowing underneath, and we can take a look at it with these ports. It's going under and then it's pumping back up on top and then flowing back in, back to the fish. So the fish are fertilizing, the plants are filtering, and we get that symbiotic cycle. And we're testing the water to make sure that we're not over-fertilized or under-nutrition or whatever.
Do you eat them, or do you need to kind of keep pulling it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, we'll cull them and eat them, yeah. Tilapia are a great salad fish. I mean, excellent fish. And they're a Texas fish. And then we do have some media here. This is a little bit more standard aquaponics, where you've got the floating media. And so this pool is also part of the nutrient water from the fish, and you can do the floating media in here. And so a lot of the food in here will grow for the cafe so that we can serve our own food at the cafe. We'll go along this way. It's kind of fun to see the stone bridge here. These were two fun projects that it will eventually get shrouded with lots of greenery and landscaping. We wanted to really experiment the idea that we could take just raw stones, stack them dry over a form, and pull the form and then hold. This one's a little heavier, it's a little thicker, and it's not quite as delicate. And then the second one here was one we really enjoyed. And it was fun, all stacking rock together. I certainly recognize the feeling of seeing things not going well in our greater culture. But for me, I don't think it's going to be much of a life if that means I need to go hide underground. I don't know that that's a life I want. But I have some kind of a hope that we can pull something together where things begin to fail or unravel, and there's a place where people feel like they can come and cooperate together. That has a lot more hope and meaning to me than preparing a place where I'd go hide. We know the whole combination of steps that we need to take to really get sustainable, to really make a complete ejection, is not going to happen in one generation. We want to be clear in the direction we're going, and we don't want to be impatient. We want to be thoughtful, and we want something that we start to last and take root, and recognizing the bigness of the vision of really achieving sustainability. We know it's not a single generational kind of vision. It's going to be multi-generational.
Oh, it is idyllic, really.
Yeah, it's really amazing if you can pull it off. And
yeah.
It's like that once in a while dreams come true sort of scenario.